to another race analysis video. This is just going to be a short one because this was a very boring race. Today a teammate got up the road and that meant that I had to do absolutely nothing for pretty much the whole race. We'll start off by talking about why I'm sitting on the front. This is the first lap and I'll be honest, I didn't do a warm-up. So I figured that sitting on the front for one lap or so would give me a nice warm-up and then make the rest of the race a little bit easier. It was a lovely warm evening, not too windy. This is the week after the Tour Down Under, and so everyone's been out on the road and the field was only about 25 riders, which is a really small field for a B-grade race. Quite often these races sell out at about 45, 55 riders, so this was a bit different. You can see in the tail camera Alistair, he's a teammate of mine. He's a strong rider, he's a sprinter, and so towards the end of the race we're going to see what we can do with him. I've done just over a lap on the front, and just as I've come off the gas, here comes an attack from a guy in the Keystone kit. Now I'll be quite honest, I thought this was Alex. Alex is usually the guy in the Keystone kit who attacks it at this stage of the race. Turned out that this fella called Daniel, but he's obviously just as much of a breakaway rider. As you can see, I'm quite happy by the fact that someone's gone off the front, and as someone jumps across to join him, I'm hoping that someone else is going to come through and pick up the pacemaking. I'm feeling a bit warmed up now. I'm in 160 beats a minute, doing 220 watts. But I'm still not interested in chasing this back all by myself, so I'm going to pull off and see what happens. It takes about another 30 seconds before people start attacking, and then the speed gets back up. And within about a lap they're caught. After they were caught, it was a really, really cruisy couple of laps, and I started mouthing off about it a bit.
I didn't have 30 minutes of zone 2 on the calendar today.
And despite my cutting remarks, no one else seems particularly interested in attacking, and for the next 4 laps, we really just roll around. There's a few little attacks, but nothing particularly sticking. So we're passing D grade. We're not passing them quickly. This is probably embarrassing, to be honest. And then Jack Rowe decides he's going to light it up, and he goes up the road. Now, I'm sitting behind a few Keystone guys. I'm sitting behind some teammates. I'm not chasing that myself. He looks like he's making a pretty good dig of it, but at the moment there's only one guy up the road. As you come around the corner though, you can see Frank Smith in the black kit up on the left. He starts going across to it. Now, Frank's a strong rider. He's definitely someone you want to watch out for because he's also pretty good at picking the right moves to go with. And then this happens. Nick Underwood on the right, he rockets up the road and he goes up to join the other two. This is starting to look like a dangerous break. Those 3 are probably enough to go all the way to the end. And then, in the White Sox, Art Markov's guy on my team, he races up the road. And this is fantastic. This takes all the pressure off of me and the rest of my team. We don't have to do anything. We've got a rider up the road, but what it does do, because they do stay away, and I'll spoil the rest of the race now, they stay away to the end, it means it's a pretty boring race for the rest of the time. We don't have any obligation to chase. We've got a guy up the road. There are a couple of the teams represented. I don't know Jack, but with Norwood Cycling Club with Frank Smith, Rocket Racing with Art, and with the new guest picks team with Nick Underwood, that's most of the firepower left in the bunch, already with a teammate up the road. A couple of laps later, Keystone makes an attempt to get across. They're probably the strongest team with riders not in the break, but again, just the 2 of them are here today and they're not enough to bring it back by themselves. Every time they're going to go, we're going to mark absolutely everything. No one's going to let anyone else get across, and so inevitably it just peters out. Alright, so we're in the last third of the race now. There have been a few attempts to try to close the gap, but of course none of us from Rocket, none of us from Guest Picks have done anything to try to close it. Alex Jarvis gets on the front here, and he starts pulling a turn, and that leaves me on the front with a bit of an interesting question. And I decide at this point I might as well pull a turn. I'm not going to go full bore, but at this stage I'm pretty convinced that my teammate and the break, they're away and they're going to stay away. They're miles ahead. They're about half a lap ahead of us at this point. You can't see them in the front camera. You can see them every time you go around the corner. They're coming back the other way. So I figure what I've been doing for the last 15-20 minutes is just closing down any people who try to attack off the front. So if I get on the front and occasionally pull a turn and keep the pace reasonably high, that's going to discourage other people from attacking over the top, and that means it's more likely that this group is never going to sort of have a consistent, concerted chase effort. I've also decided at this point that since my teammate's up the road, he's got a pretty good shot at getting out at least a podium for this. Alistair and I might at least try to get something out of it, and I decided we're going to have a bit of a lead-out practice. There's a theory behind this. He's led me out a couple of times over the last few years to some good results. I figure it's time for me to give him at least an attempt of a lead-out, and so I start trying to set that up in the last sort of closing laps of the race. And what that means in practice at this point is staying near the front of the race and making sure he does too. So we're coming through with 2 laps to go. The break is still well and truly away. I reckon they've still got between a quarter and half a lap ahead of us. They're probably 45 seconds ahead at this point. Keystone and this other guy in the blue are doing a fantastic job keeping the pace really high, and I've got my sprinter directly in front of me. He's sitting in pretty much the choice wheel, third wheel. I should be in front of him, but at this point I know we've got 2 laps to go and I'm not too worried. I know I can always move up easily on the right hand side as we come down the back straight, and so I'm pretty confident that I can do that when I need to. So a few seconds later, as planned, I just come up alongside Alistair, tell him I'm slotting in and that I'm going to give him a lead out, and I take the wheel that he was on. He does the right thing, he drops back and lets me take the wheel, and now we're all pretty well set up with a lap and a half to go, with 2 riders ahead of me and with my sprinter on my wheel. So we've got Adam Davis ahead of me, he was in one of the early breaks, and Daniel Gale, he's also one of the strong Keystone riders. Misha goes for a late attack. Misha's really good at these sort of lap and a half to go attacks. He's also really strong on some of the longer breakaways. He and another rider had a 2-up breakaway at the East End Crit last year, and on a wet track managed to stay away from the full bunch for about the last 15-20 minutes. He's someone I'm going to follow if he goes, because there is a good chance that he'll either get away or take a few people with him. But at this point I realised that when I went after him I lost my sprinter. Looked over my shoulder, couldn't see him, but then I saw that he was actually coming through ahead of me, worked out that that's where I needed to be, so put in a bit of a dig to get back in front of him. I saw Misha flicking the elbow and I decided that I was going to get back on the front and try to close these last few gaps, and I saw that Alistair was on my wheel, which is exactly what we needed. So we're in the last lap. We've got 2 riders ahead of me still. The race is up the road, so I'm not too worried about trains coming through with a serious attempt, but it's now time for me to do what I'm going to do if I am going to do a lead out. Once again though, I've managed to thread a needle and I've lost my sprinter behind me. Something I've got to learn about leading out is to, when I do go through a gap, to make sure that there's a big enough gap for my sprinter to follow. However, I looked back and I saw that Raf was on my wheel and Alistair was on his, and I figured that was close enough, and so I could light it up. This ended up being an all-time power record for me for about 30 seconds or so, hitting about 550 watts down the back straight. As we're coming into the bottom corner, I kicked the clutch in, and this is probably where I made a bit of a mistake. I should have powered through the corner a little bit more, and unfortunately a few gaps opened up behind me. Alistair got pushed off my wheel, and then he had to sprint from sort of 5th, 6th wheel rather than 2nd wheel. A couple of really good sprinting performances. Alex Canane on the pink bike came through, bouncing around, and I just dropped in the clutch again and watched the race go off ahead. At the end of the day, the 4 riders that were in the break stayed away, and my teammate got 3rd. A solo rider who'd made a late attack with sort of 6 laps to go managed to come across in 5th, but then Alistair came 3rd in the bunch sprint. So quite a few things to learn from me. I've definitely got to get better at threading the needle with a sprinter on my wheel. But a few good takeaways. I was able to put down some pretty good power in the lead out. I certainly strung it out on the last lap, and if I'd been able to keep my sprinter on my wheel, I think that would have been a fantastic lead out and set him up well. Really looking forward to practicing this a few more times, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.